I had actually warned my students not to believe anything they heard tonight based on some really funny stories from other weeks, but that is actually completely true. And I stand by Gwen's advice that you should never go to Zumba. Maybe you like it, but if you haven't been before, it is very awkward and very dangerous. So I'm going to read the first half of a story tonight. Can't quite make it to the end, it's pretty long, but it's called Stray. Dogs lurked in all corners of the island. Not just on beaches, in alleyways, or near fruit stands and dumpsters, but sometimes even in the barren concrete parking garage beneath Natalie's apartment. Natalie didn't like the sight of the dogs exactly, but she felt a certain affinity for them, some kind of orphaned solidarity from a distance, and she appreciated the jolt of adrenaline that surged through her each time one of them stepped out from the shadows. The truth was, she'd been surprised by how familiar, navigable, and even luxurious she found Puerto Rico. Surprised and oddly disappointed. She was spending the summer in Condado, an expensive slice of shore close to the capital, where apartment buildings seemed to rise straight from the sand and their rows of windows shimmered green over the ocean. On the south side of her apartment stood a row of identically shaped American chain stores. To the north was a sparkling beach, where bodies lay complacent as corpses and wet heads floated serenely on the lime blue water. She had expected, had counted on even, some degree of distracting hardship, disorientation, danger, or at least a language barrier. But aside from the dogs, all the fears and uncertainties that pulled at her like an undertow were still her own. Those familiar, perpetual, sharp and shaky reverberations left over from her mother's death. Natalie and her college roommate Monica had come to waitress at Monica's aunt's restaurant in Old San Juan. It seemed as active and subsuming as any summer job could be. But in her first week, Natalie found herself hovering beside tables of tourists, nervous and hesitant to interrupt them. One ruddy-faced man said to her, "What are you waiting for, pretty lady? Can we help you?" She misinterpreted many orders, took minutes to open bottles of wine, and one night, in front of customers, emptied a carafe of water on her apron and satiny ballet flats. The spill flooded the phone in her pocket, and when she finally took it out, drops of water slid and rebounded beneath the screen like marbles in an old-fashioned puzzle. The next day, she rolled them back and forth all morning as she sipped coffee, waiting for Monica to wake up so she could use her phone to find a licensed cell phone retailer. When Natalie arrived at the small, un-air-conditioned shop off PR 26, a man in a blue t-shirt named Andres looked at her with sympathy for several long seconds, then said there might be a chance to fix it. "Isn't there always a little chance?" he grinned. A slender gap separated his small, nearly square teeth. "Well, that is, if you can survive 24 hours without it." His English was near impeccable, with just a gentle dusting of melodious overpronunciation. Natalie said she could. When she returned the next day, he had fixed it. "You have quite a few voicemails," he remarked, his eyes fixed on her curiously. Dressed in all black for her shift, she'd straightened her blonde hair and pinned the front pieces back in a voluminous, sort of glamorous crest in order to prevent obstructions while waitressing. But she also knew that this arrangement drew attention to the fine structure of her face, her silver and blue dangling earrings, and her tan. Of course, the messages would all be from her father, and she wouldn't return them. She gave Andres a thankful smile and asked, "How did you do it?" "You want to know? Are you sure?" His face and nose were wide, a little flat, his lips full and pale. "You don't want to just take it and then run?" "Well, don't I owe you?" Natalie lowered her eyes to her purse, awkwardly unsure of the need for a transaction. "How did you do it?" "How about," he began slowly, "you take a walk with me to La Fortaleza?" His tongue flitted through the last 5 syllables. "But we would have to go around dinner time," he added. "That's when it thunderstorms." As he asked her, a little rumble of fear and excitement made her cheeks warm and her breath shallow. She waited a few seconds, expecting him to offer dinner. He didn't, but she agreed anyway. He said he could meet her in front of her apartment on her day off. "You already told him where we live?" Monica snapped, when Natalie relayed the happenings that night by the register. "Do you have a problem with that?" No, it's just, I don't think this is the time to take chances, Natalie. You know, after what happened with your mom." Monica had never been the one to bring up Natalie's mother. They'd barely discussed her. Natalie didn't doubt that Monica cared about her, genuinely, but she also knew that Monica had asked 3 other friends to join her in Puerto Rico before asking Natalie. They'd met in a sociology class at UCSB sophomore year. Each class, they both snuck into the last row a few minutes late. They roomed together because their better friends were going to study abroad. You've just already been hurt so much. I guess I thought you came here, to just be as happy as you can and avoid more problems. Monica gave Natalie a sympathetic look, then added, as she stepped toward the dining room, I mean, what do you really know about this guy? Doubt swelled in Natalie as Monica walked away. Knowing that Monica had conjured it, however, Natalie took a deep breath and swallowed. Closing her eyes, she saw his face, his body, his tight t-shirt, his smile with his imperfectly cute teeth. A shudder scurried through her, and she knew that as long as she felt this trembling thing, which could be fear or desire or anything really, it would be worth it. It did storm the night of their first date. They rode a bus and walked a few blocks before the hot purple lightning started to ricochet across the sky, cutting across the tall, pale towers of La Fortaleza and lighting up the wide, sand-colored stone flats of the fortress. Natalie said stupidly, "Those are like real bolts." Despite the royal purple glow, it was the most perfect lightning she'd ever seen. Andres laughed at her and said he could show her lots more things. Then ropes of hard rain pounded them before she could make fun of that statement or wonder at it. They ran back to his car, splashing and shielding their heads, and drove to her apartment. Monica winced as they walked past her, towards Natalie's room, dripping rain. Later, as they lay together, Andres whispered, "A blow dryer, that's what it was." "What?" she laughed. "What are you talking about?" "A blow dryer, that's how I did it, how I got you." Puzzled, she ran her hand across his buzz cut, through which a few chocolate-colored moles were visible, and realized he was talking about her phone. After Andres left, Natalie barely slept, rolling in her sheets and remembering how it felt to hold his hand in the rain. She might regret it tomorrow, she knew, but tonight, her sleeplessness seemed miraculous. That week, Natalie saw Andres almost every day. Toward the end of the week, Monica asked, on the way to the restaurant, "Did he go to college? Where's he from?" "The land of sugar," he calls it. "Are you going to go there and meet his family?" "I don't know." "You should. You guys are getting kind of serious." The land of sugar was Yabucoa, about an hour southeast of San Juan. Andres lived there with his family in a farmhouse with chickens and roosters when he wasn't spending the night in Condado. He said Yabucoa was the most fertile valley on the island, filled with rivers, bananas, guajana flowers, and satos, stray mutts. "There are satos everywhere," Natalie countered. "Not like Yabucoa," he said. "Trust me." Andres wanted to leave Yabucoa and live in San Juan. There was no one interesting to meet outside the capital. Like you. Someone like you would have no reason to go to Yabucoa. "But I do." He laughed and swung her hand. They were walking along the beach in Condado, not far from her apartment, away from the public parking lot and the expanse of sand that connected it to the water, toward a thinner part of the beach. "Can I meet your family?" she asked, emboldened by the darkness and his grasp, tight and secure, of her hand. "My family?" he echoed quick, as if he hadn't thought of any such visit. "My family is nothing special. When I say that, people think I'm cruel, but it's just true sometimes. Don't you ever meet a woman and just feel bad right away for whoever is going to marry her? Some people should not have to be lived with, I think." Natalie was surprised that Andres could speak of his mother that way. Then she thought of her father and said that he was one of those people too. "Then why does your mom live with him?" Natalie hadn't told him about her mother. She pulled her hand out of his grasp and crossed her arms, trying to focus on her breathing. Her father had wanted a divorce. Her mother had refused. "Do you really think it's that easy to end something like that?" she asked. Then she turned to watch a stray dog, who arched its head back and wheeled in a circle, then dug the same head into the sand. "Huh, no," Andres said lightly. "I'm kidding. Probably everyone in my family is like your dad. What's our buddy got?" The dog was licking a crumpled orange soda can, whimpering and snarling at it alternately. "No food, Sato. No food, pendejo." He lunged toward the dog and kicked the can out from below his wet nose. The mutt barked and looked at Andres, as if deciding whether he had the energy to fight. Then he dropped his head and dragged his paws toward the can. Andres laughed at the dog, as if glad for the distraction and the opportunity to change the subject. "Well," Natalie said, once she had breathed enough to smooth out any trembles in her voice, "I want to see this land of sugar. I do." If he could joke like that, then his family was nothing like hers. Andres stopped and looked toward the sky. There were no stars, just faint light behind one seamless cloud. There's no sugar there anymore. One afternoon, on Natalie and Monica's day off, Andres said he had a surprise for them. Monica was out when he arrived at their apartment, with plantains cradled in his arms and the looped end of a leash slung around his wrist. A small dog that Natalie had never seen tugged and darted on the other end of the cord. "How would you like to make some tostones?" Andres asked with a grin. As he unhooked the leash and moved toward the kitchen, Natalie watched the dog, a chihuahua, tear a thin leaf off a potted fern. "This will be something that you can bring back with you to California." "The dog?" she asked. He laughed. "The recipe." "I didn't know you had a dog." Natalie tried to follow and scrutinize the dog, but it seemed to take an interest in everything but her. It leaped on and off a bar stool and scurried across the hardwood floor with alarmingly abrupt changes of focus. The dog could jump as high as anything it wanted to see. "Does it like to be petted?" No, she's pretty annoying. Come on." He leaned toward her with his hands spread on the counter. "I'm hungry, and I want you to learn this." She tipped her head and met his eyes. "All right, I want to learn." Once they had 2 inches of oil warming in the skillet, Andres showed Natalie how to cut the plantains lengthwise into strips. He penetrated the soft fruit with a small cut at the far end, then made 4 strips with 3 quick slices. Natalie held her plantain gingerly and cut slowly. The sour smell of the plantains and the pattering clicks of the dog's paws had her feeling skittish, and she was blinking excessively, dry, fluttering moth-like blinks that made her think of her mother, from whom she'd inherited this habit, though a much milder strain. Between each cut, she looked up to check the dog, though after a few minutes, its paws went silent and it seemed to have disappeared. When the last plantain was cut, Andres wet his fingers and flicked drops of water at the still surface of the oil. They bounced back sizzling and scared Natalie. "Shit, warn me at least," she said, hoping as she spoke to sound more annoyed than panicked. "Well, get ready now. We're going to drop these into the oil, in ships." The first batch of strips sunk below the surface and lay there, darkening beneath the bubbling yellow-brown oil. After a few minutes, Andres flipped each one with a fork. As he did, the oil started to pop, and a few stray drops hit Natalie on the arm. When that batch was done, Andres scooped them out with a spatula and separated them onto 3 plates. "I'll mash these ones," Andres said. "Watch." He took one of the plates of plantains and pressed it on top of another, readjusting and pressing in quick bursts. When he lifted the plate, the plantains beneath it were flatter and thinner, with some soft pale fruit bursting out of the dark fried skin. And now we get to fry them all again. Monica got back from a shopping trip as they finished frying and pressing the plantains. They were about to fry the original batch a second time. "What is this smell?" From the front door, she couldn't see the plates, oil, or plantain peels in the kitchen. "Your aunt never made you tostones, Monica?" Andres asked. "I've had tostones, but wow, that's going to be a lot to clean up." She dropped her bag and pushed her sunglasses into her hair. "I've had them, but I wouldn't want to—" "Oh my God, a dog." The chihuahua jumped out from under a chair and ran toward Monica. More interested in her than in Natalie, it jumped up against her and she backed away. "Whose is this?" "It's Andres's." "With a pink collar? And is that a heart-shaped tag?" Andres laughed. "Well, how was your day, Monica? Great to see you too." "I'm going to my room. Please don't destroy anything in the kitchen. Be really careful." "Maybe you'll want some when we're done," Andres offered. "Maybe." When Monica had left the kitchen, Natalie said to Andres, "It's not worth it." "What?" "Getting into it with her." "You think that's getting into it?" "She worries a lot. This is her aunt's place." Andres picked up a plate and let the fried and flattened plantains slide back into the oil. They crackled and sunk. "So? I didn't know you were bringing a dog over. I don't know how her aunt would feel about that." "Pinky's not going to do anything, Natalie. She weighs like 10 pounds. "Pinky?" The dog was under the coffee table. She appeared to have calmed down since Monica's arrival. Her collar was indeed pink, but pale with a slight shimmer. Natalie went to the bathroom and paused beside her, stooping to pick her up. She held her by her hard, skinny torso, and was surprised at how old and almost cynical her face looked for such a small creature. Her silver tag was shaped like a heart and engraved with the name Pinky Hernandez and a phone number, as well as an address, 127 Calle Carrillo, number 3B, Yabucoa. Natalie felt surprise, a slight wrenching in her stomach, at the sight of the apartment number. She thought first of deceit, then, ashamed at her cynicism, this obvious paranoia fostered in her by her father, she wondered about poverty. Could the farmhouse be divided into units, like the row houses of older friends she visited in San Francisco? Her ignorance immediately embarrassed her. Without any kind of understanding or context, she had no right to be suspicious. Maybe his family had somehow lost what they'd had before, and Andres didn't want to disclose that. Natalie understood not wanting to share misfortune. Pinky squirmed as Natalie carried her into the kitchen. "What are you doing? I need your help," Andres said impatiently. "Put her down. Don't let Monica He trailed off. "Monica? What about Monica?" Pinky shifted in her arms and started to nip her shirt with her teeth. "Whatever, it's whatever. Can you flip them? This part's quicker, just put her down." Natalie lowered Pinky and let her drop for the last foot. The dog landed on her feet and scurried away. Monica was right. The collar is pink and the tag is a heart. That's weird. "What are you getting at?" "She's your dog." Natalie took the fork and flipped one plantain, keeping her eyes on the pan. "She's your dog?" "Did I say she was my dog?" Natalie continued flipping the plantains, which had become brown and dense. One was too soft, and when she flipped it, broke into 2 pieces. "Shit, take them out. Start taking them out." Natalie flipped the last one and waited. "Take them out. I messed up." "I messed up. Give me the fork. They weren't supposed to be in here this long." His voice was agitated. Pinky must have sensed his agitation and run to him. Suddenly she was poking at their feet. Natalie tried to move out of his way and felt her foot hit the dog. Pinky moved, then all of a sudden reappeared jumping at Natalie's waist, right by the stove. Natalie screamed and dropped her hand to push the dog away from the pan, but she was still holding the fork, which slammed against the handle. Natalie leaned instinctively away from the hot oil in the falling pan, but Pinky didn't see it coming. All right. So they take the dog in the car. I can't go to the end, but this is where the end sort of happens. They parked at a beach where the parking lot and the sand were nearly one. Cars were parked in random places, facing different directions, like scattered dominoes, and there was no soft, dimpled sand, only the hard and flat kind. There weren't many people, just a few in the distance, loosely gathered around a block of overflowing dumpsters. There were dogs, satos, so many satos. "Where the hell are we?" Natalie said. Andres didn't respond. There were dogs everywhere, gaunt and hungry-looking, dirty, nervous. Some were running or fighting or walking. Some were lying down. Andres carried Pinky and walked toward the water. When they passed one dog lying down, with its ribs protruding through thin gray fur, Natalie looked at its face and saw that it was dead. Then she looked around again and counted 8 dogs on the ground, none of them stirring.